let's take a few minutes to refresh the motivation generated earlier. So I'd like to first finish a few things, and then I'll leave time later for questions if you have questions. So this morning I was going through a list of 7 stages of grief. This is from the Western um, tradition, psychology, sociology, and so on. So it could be helpful because, like, in my experience, there's not much information about grief in Tibet traditional Buddhism, or at least Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, they're aware of grief, but they don't really have specific information on how to deal with it, how to work with it. So some of this information from the Western tradition could be helpful. Okay, so we're up to, I can't even see that. Depression. Is depression on the list? Yeah, number 4. And so this may be a period of isolation and loneliness during which you process and reflect on the loss. You may have thoughts like, how can I go on? Or what am I without that person? You may have feelings of despair or hopelessness. You might think you'll feel this way forever. Seek help. Yeah, so I think that's probably pretty normal to have thoughts and feelings like that. And again, like in my experience with Buddhism, there's not a lot of talk about depression. And I've even heard some lamas admit that they don't really understand what depression is. Doesn't seem to be a big problem in Tibetan culture, but it is a big problem in Western culture, and maybe it's also spreading, becoming more global. And some years ago I came across a it's kind of a self-help program from the UK. It was based on, yeah, doing a lot of research. And what they found was that most, if not all, depression involves rumination, like thoughts that keep going around and around your mind that are, um, unhelpful and depressive thoughts. And and I could really see that in myself. I felt a lot of depression when I was younger, and um, coming to Buddhism and learning Buddhism did help to a certain extent, but I would still sometimes feel depressed. So I did find it helpful to get information from the Western tradition. So so yeah, when feeling depressed, it's good if you can to look at your mind and see what's going on. What is the monologue or dialogue or whatever it is that's happening? What are your thoughts saying? And you probably will find that, yeah, there's negative thoughts and often self-deprecating thoughts, like I'm hopeless, I'm lousy, I'm no good, nobody loves me, you know, um, yeah, self-critical, um, diminishing thoughts. And I mean, it's only natural that if those are going on in your mind, that kind of voice is talking to you all the time. It's hard to be happy, right? Um, and so, what can help is to do a reality check. Kind of take a step back from these thoughts, look at what they're saying, and ask yourself, is this stuff true? Yeah. And hopefully you'll recognize that it's not. Maybe a little bit true, but maybe a lot of exaggeration. Like nobody loves me. I mean, there may be some people who don't love you, but there must be people who do love you, right? So if you kind of check that to see if it's true or not, you should be able to recognize that it's not. It's exaggerated. It's not really in accordance with reality. So if you can do that, and yeah, just take an honest look at what the thoughts are saying, and be willing to accept that, yeah, they're wrong, or they're exaggerated, or they may be partly wrong, partly right, but probably mostly wrong. And so that, if you can do that on your own, it may not always be easy to do on your own. You may need help from somebody, but yeah, doing that on your own can help. Um, and so, in the case of feeling grief over the loss of a loved one, again, you can check what your mind is saying, and it might be saying things like, I can never be happy again without that person there in my life. I'll never be able to have happiness again. So, you know, check the truth of that. Is that really true? And I mean, it's hard to know if we don't see the future, but you could investigate other people's experiences, and you probably find that, yeah, people do go through difficulties after the loss of a loved one, but it's not something permanent, something that will last forever, your entire life, and it will never end. And people do manage to find happiness again, even after the loss of a loved one. So anyway, the basic thing I'm talking about here is use your wisdom, your intelligence, your discriminating intelligence to check the truth, the validity of the thoughts going on in your mind. And then if you can recognize they're not correct, they're not valid, then choose more positive thoughts, attitudes, ways of thinking. So bring to mind positive qualities you have, good things about your life. You know, often we overlook or take for granted positive aspects of our life and only focus on the negative ones. It's like we have a negative bias. They actually say, neuroscientists say that this is the way our brain works. Our brain has a negative bias. We pay more attention to negative information and less attention to positive information. And in fact, Rick Hansen, who's a neuropsychologist as well as a meditator, he says our brain is like Velcro when it comes to negative information, and like Teflon when it comes to positive information. And apparently, yeah, that's what they find when they study the brain. Positive experiences just kind of slide right off. Negative ones stick. So, but it can be changed. Yeah, just because we have the habit of doing that doesn't mean we can't change it. We can, and he talks about ways. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, we can change the way that our mind works and the way that our brain works, and pay more attention to positive things about ourselves, about our life, about the world. And if we learn to do that, we make a habit of doing that. It starts to happen more easily, more naturally, and we'll find ourselves probably feeling better, happier, and less miserable and, yeah, negative. Couldn't wait till later. Yeah, so if you're not able to do that on your own, you know, bring about changes in your way of thinking, then seek help. And it doesn't have to be professional help, but talking to a friend can sometimes just help you see what's going on in your mind and help you find a way out. Sometimes, you know, you're looking at your own mind and trying to figure things out, and you just keep going around and around in circles. But sometimes it's helpful to talk to somebody else, and something they may say will just go, ah, yeah. Or just in the course of the conversation, you'll realize something, and that will help you to to see the problem and to see a solution. Then next one is the upward turn. So at this point, the stages of grief, like anger and pain, have died down, and you're left in a more calm and relaxed state. So that probably sounds very inviting. And so hearing about that, we might think, yeah, that's where I want to be. I want to get there right now. But I think we have to be careful. It's not something we can force. I think it has to happen on its own. And there's a book called Facing Death and Finding Hope by Christine Longacre, who lost her husband when they were both in their early 20s. And following that, she started working with dying people and had a lot of experience working with hospice and dying people, and then wrote this book based on her experience. And she said in the book that after her husband passed away, she would have sort of waves of grief. She'd go through periods of intense sadness and pain and crying, and then that would pass, and then she'd think, oh, it's over now. The grief is gone now. But then after some time, it would happen again. She'd go through that same cycle again, and then again it would pass, and then again it would come. So it can happen in waves, and so it's probably better not to think that the first time you have some experience of peace, calmness after intense feelings of grief, that's it, that it won't happen anymore. It could happen again. But it's good to know that eventually things will calm down. You know, these heavy waves of of pain and sadness and crying and so on will calm down. And then the next is reconstruction and working through. And this is where you can begin to put pieces of your life back together and move forward. So, the loss of a loved one can be quite disruptive. It's difficult to function as you used to. And you go through these periods of a lot of emotions and difficulties, but eventually things calm down, and then you can start putting your life back together and move forward. And that could take months, it could take years. There's no fixed amount of time, so we shouldn't impose on ourselves or impose on anybody else those kind of notions that by now you should be beyond this. By now you should be moving on, moving forward. And it probably doesn't mean that, even if we do start putting our life back together, it's going to be the same as before. It'll most probably be quite different. Will never really be the same. But I think it's good to realize that we do have choices about what we do with our mind. I mean, this is very much the Buddhist view, and I understand it's also the findings in psychology and neuroscience that, we can work with our mind. We can change our mind. We don't have to just go with whatever pops up, whatever thoughts and feelings pop up in our mind. We can work with those. So, for example, if thoughts of your deceased loved one come up in the mind, and then that triggers sadness, longing, and so on, these difficult emotions, we don't have to go with that. We don't have to get caught up in that. I mean, you have the choice. If you want to, you can. But just to know that there's a choice. There's always a choice with what we do with our mind. And so you can learn other ways of thinking and feeling and working with things. And that includes spiritual practices. I'll talk about those later. But there's all these spiritual practices for transforming problems, transforming suffering into the path, making it part of our spiritual practice, our spiritual path, to actually help us grow the good qualities and even realizations that we need to progress along the path and reach higher states so we can be more beneficial for others. And if you're not into spiritual practice, there's other things you can do with your energy, like volunteer work, physical work. So, just to know that there are choices. Just because a certain thought or a certain feeling comes up in the mind doesn't mean you're obliged to get caught up in it. And there's no alternative, no choice. There are choices, and you just have to learn those choices and then make them. Choose, what you think will be more beneficial. And then the last stage on this list is acceptance and hope. This is a very gradual acceptance of the new way of life and a feeling of possibility for the future. So again, this isn't a hard and fast list that everybody goes through in the same order and in a specific time frame, but it just gives some idea of what can happen, what does happen with many people when they're experiencing grief. And I was thinking too that it can be helpful when having those feelings of grief to explore them and look at what's really going on, because I don't think grief is just one thing, one state of mind that's always the same. But if you step back and look at it, then you'll probably see different emotions, different thoughts. such as some of these here, like denial, anger, guilt, and so on. And so mindfulness is very helpful. Mindfulness has different meanings, but the usual meaning is just being present with what is happening at the moment, especially within our mind, and being able to recognize what is going on rather than being confused or feeling lost and not really understanding what's going on, but being able to notice the different types of thoughts. And in particular, in Buddhism, we use mindfulness. The whole purpose of mindfulness is to be able to recognize afflictions, disturbing attitudes like anger, attachment, greed, selfishness, because those are the things that are the cause of suffering. And if we want to be free of suffering, we need to recognize those and learn to work with them. And so if they're coming in our mind and, messing up our mind and we don't see them, we don't recognize them, then there's not much we can do. So we need to be able to recognize them. So that's something you can try to do if possible. Just apply mindfulness to what's happening in your mind, recognize, and then use whatever understanding you have of the different afflictions. Like we study these lists of afflictions, like there's 6 root afflictions, which are ignorance, attachment, anger or hatred, pride and doubt and wrong views. Those last 2 are a little complicated, but probably the first few or more. So we study what those afflictions are, what is their characteristics, and then we look at our mind and try to recognize them. And then, it takes a while, but eventually you can recognize, oh, that's attachment or that's anger. Anger is pretty easy to recognize. But sometimes there's denial. So that's a tricky thing. Yeah. We may have an affliction in our mind that we think we shouldn't have, we don't want to have, and so that can lead to denial, but that doesn't do any good. So it is important to recognize and acknowledge the existence of the afflictions. And so we learn about the different afflictions so that we can recognize them when they're present in our mind. And then we also learn different ways of dealing with them, like different antidotes or remedies, strategies. And there are specific ones for specific afflictions, like, certain things you do with attachment, other things you do with anger. There's also some general ones. We will have time to go into that a bit more as we go along. But this is one thing you can do. Pay attention to your mind. Try to notice, if you can, afflictions. And if you do, then work with those. Apply antidotes to those. But this is a lot of work. Yeah, it takes time to learn all these things. And it's really a full-time job, as the people here in the Abbey know. And it takes time to learn how to do this and make progress in it. But it's very valuable, very beneficial. And then there's also conceptions, mistaken conceptions, like thinking that things which are in reality impermanent are permanent. Those can be a little more tricky, more difficult to recognize. But if we notice ourselves having thoughts like, I thought you were always going to be there, or why did you leave me, or why is this changing? So if those kind of thoughts occur, then those are symptoms of belief in permanence, grasping at permanence. Something which is in reality impermanent, but we don't see it that way, and instead we see it as permanent or want it to be permanent. So that's that's actually also an affliction, that kind of misconception. It's a type of ignorance, um, not seeing things realistically. And also, these kind of distorted conceptions underlie other afflictions. It's because we have these distorted ways of thinking and seeing things that other afflictions arise, like anger and attachment and so on. So, yeah, so these are some other things we can do, applying our knowledge of Buddhist teachings and our practice of Buddhist teachings to what we are experiencing. So then, um, so we've been looking at grief, and in this retreat, we're also meant to be looking at resilience, which is another way of managing, handling grief. Um, and so I'd like to share something about that from the Western tradition. So the next slide. So some years ago, I came across this article called Four Keys to Wellbeing by Richard Davidson, and he's a neuroscientist. He's also a meditator and very close to the Dalai Lama, involved in is it the mind science conferences? Mind and Life conferences. So almost every year they have conferences where a number of scientists get together with the Dalai Lama and other lamas, and they discuss various issues related to the mind, Buddhism, science, and so on. So he's been very much involved in that. And he's also the founder of a I don't know if you call it organization, or anyway, it's called the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and does a lot of research on the mind and the brain, and like investigating the effects of meditation on the brain. And so this was actually a talk that he gave at the Greater Good Science Center in Berkeley. And I thought it could be useful to look at these, because I think that another factor that can affect the way we respond to loss and other, misfortune, would be just our kind of general personality, whether we are more pessimistic or optimistic, more kind of cheerful and positive, or depressed and negative. Because I could see that in my parents. My parents had very different personalities. My father was more the pessimistic type, and depressed, and would easily get upset and even angry at little things that would go wrong. And my mother was the opposite. She was very cheerful and optimistic, and able to see the good in things, and I could see how that affected them as they were getting older and approaching death. My father was not happy at all. I wasn't present when he actually died, but the last few times that I saw him before he died, he had a number of strokes, and each time it would leave him more and more incapacitated, physically as well as mentally. Yeah, he just seemed really, really unhappy, really deep sadness and sorrow. So yeah, it wasn't a happy ending to his life. On the other hand, my mother, she died of cancer, um, but she was so cheerful. I was with her the last couple of weeks, right up to the end of her life, and she was really cheerful and positive. I didn't see her looking depressed or unhappy or scared. The things, you would expect somebody to go through as they're approaching death. So she was really, really kind of, yeah, her usual self. Cheerful, positive, loving, caring, accepting of what was going on, trusting. And yeah, so it seemed like a good death, a really good death. And so it seems that, yeah, the kind of personality they had in general did affect the way that they um, dealt with their own death. And I think the same would apply to when we experience a loss in our life. If we're more pessimistic and depressive, or more optimistic and positive, then that would have an effect on how we respond to loss and other unpleasant experiences. And fortunately, this is something we can work on. So even if, we're a person who tends to be more depressive and pessimistic, we can change that. So in this talk, Richard Davidson starts off saying, well-being is a skill. All of the work that my colleagues and I have been doing leads inevitably to this central conclusion. Well-being is fundamentally no different than learning to play the cello. If one practices the skills of well-being, one will get better at it. So we can learn how to enhance our well-being and our happiness. It's basically, physical and mental happiness and well-being. And he says, based on our research, well-being has 4 constituents that have each received serious scientific attention. Each of these 4 is rooted in neural circuits, and each of these neural circuits exhibits plasticity. So we know that if we exercise these circuits, they will strengthen. Practicing these 4 skills can provide the substrate for enduring change, which can help to promote higher levels of well-being in our lives. So the first of these 4 is resilience. And he explains that as the rapidity with which we recover from adversity. So this term, I have never come across it in Tibetan, teachings. And even in the West, I don't remember hearing about resilience until, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Maybe the word was around, but it wasn't really talked about much. It seems to be relatively new. But when I think about it with respect to Tibetan Buddhist teachings, then I wonder if it might be related to a couple of practices that we do. One is patience or fortitude, one of the 6 perfections, and that has 3 types of patience. And one is called the patience of voluntarily accepting suffering. And so the idea there is when, we can't go through life without experiencing problems. It's just an inevitable aspect of life. But when we do experience problems, difficulties, suffering, whether it's physical or mental or both, instead of becoming depressed, despondent, or even angry, maybe even giving up our enthusiasm to practice, there are things we can do to work with this situation and make it part of our practice, part of our path. And practice patience rather than getting depressed, despondent, angry, and so on. There's lots of different methods. It's quite similar to this other thing we talk about, transforming problems into the path, which is part of the thought transformation teachings. So I think they're quite similar. So yeah, if you know about that practice, that type of patience, and you're working on it, aware of it, then I think that would definitely give you resilience because when you face some difficulty or tragedy, you would know how to manage it, how to deal with it, keep yourself uplifted rather than overwhelmed by it. And then there's also joyous effort. So joyous effort is another of the 6 perfections, and it's basically explained as taking delight in virtue, being happy joyful, enthusiastic to do what is virtuous, not getting bored or lazy. It's the opposite of laziness. um, yeah. So joyous effort also, includes even when we're tired, even when we don't feel good, even when things are going, not well, we're having difficulties, we still put our energy into doing what is positive, constructive, virtuous. So I thought that, yeah, that also is kind of related to resilience, having this joyful energy to keep going in spite of whatever difficulties we may face. So those are just thoughts that I had that, yeah, if we know about those two kinds of practices and we're using them, then those would give us resilience. And it seems my experience with Tibetans, they just seem to have resilience. um, yeah, I mean, the difficulties they've been through, having to leave their country and, climb over the highest mountains in the world with almost nothing, having to leave almost everything behind, and then starting up new lives in a strange country. But, they've done really well. And they're generally very kind of positive, optimistic, cheerful people. So they seem to have resilience. And also, I've heard that there's been some studies um, to determine if Tibetans some really had a hard time. They were put into prison, tortured, beaten, starved, and for years and years. And yet, when they were tested, it was found they didn't have PTSD. There's very little evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder in spite of the difficulties they've been through. And also another thing that's been found in a couple of studies is that very few Tibetans have dementia or Alzheimer's, almost non-existent among Tibetans, even the very elderly ones. So I think some scientists and sociologists are interested in, what are they doing that enables them to be so, resilient. I think it has to do with their beliefs, their religious beliefs and practices, and the worldview and so on that gives them that. But anyway, we can do it too. We can increase our resilience. And I'll read a little bit more what Richard Davidson says. He said, to paraphrase the bumper sticker, stuff happens. We cannot buffer ourselves from that stuff, but we can change the way we respond to it. Resilience is the rapidity with which we recover from adversity. Some people recover slowly, and other people recover more quickly. We know that individuals who show a more rapid recovery in certain key areas in neural circuits have higher levels of well-being. They are protected in many ways from the adverse consequences of life's slings and arrows. Recent research that we've conducted in our lab at the University of Wisconsin asked whether these specific brain circuits can be altered by regular practice in simple mindfulness meditation. The answer is yes. But you need several thousand hours of practice before you see real change. So get going on that. Unlike the other constituents of well-being, it takes a while to improve your resilience. It's not something that's going to happen quickly. But this insight can still motivate and inspire us to keep meditating. Yeah. So he's saying that, the practice of mindfulness can increase our resilience. And I think there's other practices as well from the Buddhist tradition that might help. So we'll share those. So mindfulness, the term mindfulness is very popular nowadays. and there's mindfulness apps and mindfulness magazines, and yeah, it's almost become a kind of commodity. um, but it is definitely something we find in Buddhism and Buddhist practice, although it's a lot more than the popular contemporary idea of mindfulness. Um, so, the one that's most well known in the world today is mindfulness, meaning being present, being aware of what's happening in the present in a non judgmental way. That's not the full meaning in Buddhism, but it can still be helpful if we learn that practice, train ourselves in that practice and practice it, because it enables us to be aware of what's happening in our mind. And with that awareness, we'll be able to notice the arisal of certain types of thoughts and emotions that are not good for us, that are harmful for us, like anger, distress, despair, depression, attachment, and so on. So it enables us to recognize those emotions and also other kinds of thoughts, like maybe destructive thoughts, self-destructive thoughts, or just depressive thoughts. And so so if those are happening in our mind, if those are coming up in our mind and we don't notice them, then they can easily just take over our mind, and then that will affect our mood, it will affect our health, our way of feeling, and so on. If we are practicing mindfulness and we can notice those thoughts, especially when they're first starting to come up, because those kinds of thoughts and emotions can be like little plants that they start off as just a small sprout, and then it grows and grows and gets more and bigger and more complex. So if we can notice it when it's still just a sprout, a little sprout, we'll be able to deal with it more easily, more effectively than if we wait until it's a huge plant or a tree, and it's already taken over our mind. At that point, it's more difficult to manage, to deal with. So catching it quickly and dealing with it quickly will be helpful for us to avoid being overwhelmed by these disturbing thoughts and emotions. So in the Buddha's teachings in the Pali Canon, there's one sutra called the Salata Sutra, where he talks about arrows. This is kind of quite famous in Buddhist circles in the West. The two arrows. Basically, he said that if you are hit by an arrow, you got an arrow sticking into your body, then it's painful. But by the way we respond, the way we react to that. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. Okay. Having an arrow stuck in our body is painful. And he says that is similar to a painful experience in life. Yeah. So some kind of unpleasant thing that happens, which could include the loss of a loved one or the loss of a job or any kind of misfortune. So that's like a painful experience. And then if we respond to that with certain ways of thinking and feeling and so on, then it's as if we're shooting ourselves with a second arrow. So one arrow is bad enough, two arrows is doubly bad. And he's saying that with reference to certain types of responses, like, oh, why is this happening to me? Poor me. Getting all caught in self-pity, maybe anger and blame at others who we think are responsible for this problem, or anger at ourselves, thinking we're such an idiot that we got ourselves into this situation, or escape. And that's a very common response. Just this situation is so bad, I can't stand it, and then we try to find some way of escaping: drugs or alcohol or entertainment or work, eating. So different escape routes, computer games. just trying to get away from the problem, distract ourselves. But some of those escape routes just lead to further problems. You may get addicted to the drugs, the alcohol. Um, if you overeat, you'll have health problems and so on. So, and they don't solve the problem, right? You're just running away from it. You're not facing it and solving it. And so you're kind of making things worse. So that's why he's saying it's like shooting yourself with another arrow, making it doubly painful. And so we probably all fall into that sometimes, having unskillful ways of responding to problems and difficulties. And so the solution is to practice mindfulness. Be mindful of what's happening, with the situation that you're in, what kind of thoughts, what kind of feelings, what kind of responses you're having, and be able to recognize which ones are helpful, which ones are not, and choose the helpful ones and avoid the unhelpful ones. So I would like to recommend this book. This is a nice little book by Thich Nhat Hanh called No Mud, No Lotus: The Art of Transforming Suffering. And so it's all about, how to deal with suffering and problems and difficulties in ways that are wise and skillful. And typical of Thich Nhat Hanh, it's written in very simple, easy to understand language and very inviting. I don't know, maybe not everyone likes his style, but I find it like, I read his things and I say, yeah, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And the title is interesting. He says, No Mud, No Lotus, meaning the lotus is a flower that grows in mud. It can't grow anywhere except in a yucky, dirty, muddy pond. Right? But so the roots, the seed and the roots are in this dirty, muddy water, but then the stem rises up above the water, the flower opens up, and it's completely pure and clear. It doesn't have any mud on it. So the lotus is a traditional symbol of enlightenment, because any enlightened being, like the Buddha, starts off in the world. They're ordinary people who have suffering and problems and difficulties like us, but they find a way to rise above all these difficulties and then reach this state of mind which is totally open and pure and unstained by the problems in the world. And so he's saying, if you don't have mud, you don't have a lotus. So likewise with ourselves, if we want to reach the state of enlightenment, that wonderful, beautiful state of mind, we have to go through difficulties. We have to go through muck. If we don't go through difficulties and learn from our difficulties, learn how to transform our difficulties, then we won't be able to reach enlightenment. So instead of thinking, oh, why do these problems have to happen to me? I don't want any of these things to happen. To see that, to feel a sense of gratitude for them, because they are useful. It all depends on how we look at them and how we work with them. So, so I'll just read just a few things from here about mindfulness. He says, mindfulness is the best way to be with our suffering without being overwhelmed by it. Mindfulness is the capacity to dwell in the present moment, to know what's happening in the here and now. I'll skip a few things. And he says, with mindfulness, you can recognize the presence of the suffering in you and in the world. And it's with that same energy that you can tenderly embrace the suffering. By being aware of your in-breath and out-breath, you generate the energy of mindfulness, so you can continue to cradle the suffering. So instead of having this aversion to suffering, which is what we normally do, like, go away, I don't want you, leave me alone, I want to get rid of this. That's our usual response. He's talking about just the opposite, holding it, embracing it, cradling it. With mindfulness, we are no longer afraid of pain. We can even go further and make good use of suffering to generate the energy of understanding and compassion that leads or that heals us, and we can help others to heal and be happy as well. Okay, so by working skillfully with suffering, problems, difficulties, um, we can gain understanding, wisdom, and also compassion. And that will heal us, our suffering, and enable us to help others to heal as well. And then he says the way we start producing the medicine of mindfulness is by stopping and taking a conscious breath, giving our complete attention to our in breath and our out breath. When we stop and take a breath in this way, we unite body and mind and come back home to ourselves. We feel our bodies more fully. We are truly alive only when the mind is with the body. Recognizing the tension, the pain, the stress in our body, we can bathe it in our mindful awareness, and that is the beginning of healing. If we take care of the suffering inside of us, we have more clarity, energy, and strength to help address the suffering of violence, poverty, and inequity of our loved ones, as well as the suffering in our community and the world. If, however, we are preoccupied with the fear and despair in us, we can't help remove the suffering of others. There is an art to suffering well. If we know how to take care of our suffering, we not only suffer much, much less, we also create more happiness around us and in the world. That's just a little sample. It's very beautiful. Yeah, so it's quite similar as well in the Tibetan Buddhist teachings when we talk about transforming suffering into the path or utilizing suffering into the path, and this practice of patience or fortitude, of accepting suffering and making use of suffering. So it's all very similar kind of teachings, and it's, yeah, and they do work, these practices. They really are helpful. So I do have more. Oh, yeah, let's just go through these and then I can come back to them later, give more information about them. So, resilience, that's the first of the 4 keys to well being, and we can increase our resilience, train ourselves to have more resilience, although he says it takes time. Don't expect instant overnight. The others may be easier. Number 2 is outlook. So this is the ability to see the positive in others, the ability to savor positive experiences, the ability to see another human being as a human being who has innate basic goodness. So being able to see the good, the positive in people, in ourselves, in situations. And so we have practices for training that. One example is contemplating the kindness of others. It's called the kindness of others. It basically means that everything we enjoy, everything we have, everything we use is dependent on others. And that's something we don't always think about, but it's good to think about it. Like the food that we eat. It's actually in the contemplations we recite before lunch, contemplating all the causes and conditions and the kindness of others by which we have this food. So just thinking of a plate of food or a sandwich or an apple and where that came from, all the people involved in producing it, picking it when it was ready, transporting it to the market, people working in the market or factory, and so on and so forth. So many, many people involved in just bringing us one piece of fruit or one meal. just taking the time to contemplate all those people and generate a sense of gratitude, how kind they are that they did that for me. And so that's just one example, but in every area of our life, every aspect of our life, we are recipients of the kindness. And the word kindness may sound a bit strange because we think, but they're just doing their job and they're getting paid for it. They're not doing it out of kindness. Well, we don't know. I mean, people are often happy about the work that they do, thinking, I really want to produce good food for people. And they get satisfaction from that. So there could be a sense of kindness in them. But even if they are just doing it to make money and support themselves, the fact is we receive benefit. Yeah. We benefit from the work that they do. And in that sense, it's kindness. Yeah. So it all depends on how we look at it. And so everything in our life, the buildings we live in and work in and play in, the electricity, the gas, the water, all the furniture we have, the roads we drive on, the cars we drive in, and so on, every single thing in our life, there are people involved in producing those things. And without those people doing the work they do, we wouldn't be able to enjoy the result. So that's one contemplation that we can use to increase our appreciation of others and see the goodness of others, see the good that others are doing. And that's a way of feeling happier instead of only looking at people's faults, mistakes, what they don't do well, what they don't do right, focusing on the negative things. So just training ourselves to focus on positive things that people are doing, good qualities that they have, and so on. So it may take effort initially, but the more we do it, the more it'll be easy to do, because we probably find it so much better, it's so much more satisfying to think that way and feel that way. Okay, so that's something that's not too difficult to work on, and you don't even have to go into deep meditation to do it. You can just do it in your daily life. Then number 3 is attention, meaning staying focused on what we're doing. So within Buddhism, there's a lot of material about how to train our attention, how to develop our concentration. It's not easy. This one is also not easy. It takes time and energy to really get there. But again, if we put our energy into doing it, practicing it, it does get easier. And we can do this during meditation, but also during other activities, washing dishes, driving your car, whatever it is you're doing. Just bring your attention back to what you're doing. And then generosity. That's, for many people that comes very easily. Many people just love giving, being generous. For others, it's more difficult, but it is possible to increase that. Even if it doesn't come kind of easily and naturally, we can work on it. And we can start with small things. You don't have to give huge gifts, huge amounts of money, but just little things, little gifts. And also in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about different kinds of generosity. It's not just giving material things like money and food. Another kind of giving is giving protection. And that involves saving a life. If there's a being, human being or animal or insect, that's in danger of losing their life, and you rescue them. Like you see insects in water sometimes, they're trying to get out, so just fishing it out and putting it somewhere safe. Or they're on the ground, the road, the path where they might get stepped on, and you move them to another place where they won't get stepped on. So there's often opportunities to save a life of a little creature like that. And that's a type of giving. We're giving life, giving protection. That's a really beautiful practice to do. there's also giving Dharma, which is said to be the best gift, because Dharma, meaning the teachings and the practices that enable us to transform our minds, improve our minds, have greater peace and happiness, and attain higher states of mind, and remove our suffering, stop creating the causes of suffering. So all the different teachings and methods for bringing about that kind of spiritual transformation, that's what we mean by Dharma. So if we have opportunities to share the Dharma with others, and this can involve teaching Dharma, but even if we're not yet knowledgeable enough or confident enough to share the Dharma in that way, we can do it in other ways. Just like in conversation with somebody, and you can share something that you've learned that you think could be helpful for them in dealing with some problem they're going through. And you don't even have to use any Buddhist jargon, but just use ordinary language. How to work with anger, how to work with depression, and so on. So that's sharing Dharma. And sharing Dharma by giving books or letting people know about teachings they can listen to, watch online, or whatever. But we should only do that if they're interested. Buddhism is not at all proselytizing religion. Buddha said you should only teach Dharma when people ask for it. They have to show an interest. We don't go around pushing people to learn Dharma. But if they are open, if they are interested, and we help them learn the Dharma, then that's sharing Dharma. So that's also a kind of giving generosity. So anyway, that's just a little bit about these 4 keys of well-being. So if we work on those, practice those, increase those, then that will help us have greater well-being. And I think that means happiness as well as physical well-being. So I'll stop there because some of you may have questions. If you don't have questions, I'll carry on, but I want to give you a chance to ask questions. Tom or Shiva, sorry.
You can call me Tom if you spell it with an A.
Sorry?
You can call me Tom if you spell it with an A.
You got
what I hear.
Tom at your heart.
Yeah, on the stages of grief, the close research associate of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross a few years ago, based on continuing research, added a final stage of grief that grows out of acceptance, and that stage is meaning, which is really consistent with a lot of the things you're saying from a Buddhist perspective, like plowing adversity into the path and doing constructive things like you did with your mom. But basically it's understanding of life and death that grows out of acceptance, and it's kind of a spiritual meaning that that he wrote about. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really an important development from the Western viewpoint.
Yeah, thank you.
That slip of paper was from me. I got this question on karma is actually in our aggregates that you mentioned. So feelings is actually one of the aggregates. So if we have this, like we acknowledge it, but if we keep overemphasizing it, aren't we creating more karma?
You're saying if we acknowledge feelings but overemphasize it, aren't we creating more karma? Possible? Yeah. So you're saying in regard to this course, you feel like we're overemphasizing feelings?
No, as in, if let's say you are grieving, in the process of grieving, and then
Mm-hmm.
you keep emphasizing on that sadness,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, aren't you like just cycling in it again? Like you're just creating that karma.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I mean, um, there's the practice of the four establishments of mindfulness, also called four foundations of mindfulness. And so that's applying mindfulness to four different aspects of our being. And the first is the body, practicing mindfulness of our body. And then the second is feelings. So there's a practice of mindfulness with regard to feelings. And there, the main practice is to observe feelings, be aware of feelings, because they're happening all the time, every moment. We have either a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral, neither pleasant or unpleasant feeling. And if we're not mindful of our feelings, they can easily lead to afflictions. Pleasant feelings usually lead to attachment. I want more of that. That makes me feel good. I want to have that, own that, and so on. Unpleasant feelings, if we're not careful, can lead to aversion, anger, hatred. I want that to go away. I don't like that. And so lack of mindfulness of feelings certainly can lead to increase of afflictions, and then with an increase of afflictions we can create more negative karma, more unwholesome karma. So yeah, I think in working with grief, probably the predominant feeling there would be unpleasant feeling, sadness. So as a practitioner, Buddhist practitioner, then one would want to notice the feelings of sadness and try not to allow it to increase afflictions like anger, aversion, hatred. Um, but these feelings can be very powerful and not easy to work with. It depends on your level of practice, your experience of practice, your level of realization, and so on. So, so I guess here in this course, the emphasis is on, just trying to be aware of those feelings of sadness and work with them, transform them into something more positive and more constructive, rather than drowning in them, being overwhelmed by them, creating more suffering with them, and so on. So yes, to whatever extent you're able to do that, you're able to work with the feelings and not allow them to turn into afflictions and then more karma, then that's really excellent. But we also have to be careful not to deny feelings, because this is something people can easily do. Not allow themselves to feel, trying to push it away, deny it. So there's often a fine line between denial and acceptance. You might think, oh, I'm accepting it, but in fact, you're maybe denying it. So we have to watch our mind and try to determine whether we're doing that in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way. Did you want to ask your question? She had her hand up earlier and I asked her to wait.
As it relates to depression from earlier, I can attest to parts of that. My profession as a school psychologist, but years ago when everything started happening, I myself fell into a very deep depression, and imposter syndrome took over. And I thought, okay, well, if we can't teach. That's what, so I was trying to teach the skills as much as I could to students. At the same time, I learned with the depression, there becomes a downward spiral. And as you were mentioning about the thoughts, and challenging thoughts can be very challenging to do in the midst of a dark place that you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I found for myself what was very helpful beyond what I was saying and talking to people, because when they were responding, I wasn't really integrating it. It was just like tunnel vision. What was very helpful was journaling, and more research is coming out about how physical handwriting helps integrate and synthesize information into different areas of our brain, and it allows us to tap into our prefrontal cortex more, which gets disconnected when the emotional parts of our brain take over. So as for the challenging of the thoughts, the book, there's a book back there that touches on it too. The title is No Thinker or Thought Without a
Thoughts
Thinker.
Without a Thinker.
Yeah.
Mm.
And some of the concepts is what I was introduced to a few years back, where it's, I don't know where this would stand with the I, but rather than so much identifying with the thought, is like I am observing the thought blank. Like when I notice this thought, I feel blank. Is this thought helpful to me? Where is my attention going when I'm noticing this thought? Like that order of the questions was helpful rather than going quickly into the challenge of it, because it felt so true and it felt so on point, because your mind plays tricks on you. So I found that helpful, and the book back there helpful too in regards to challenging yourself.
Yeah, just in response to that, while teaching this course, I was thinking about this. There was a woman, I'll try to make it short, but she lost her entire family in the tsunami disaster and wrote a book about it called Wave. Has anyone read that? Wave? I can't remember her name. It's a long Sri Lankan name. But anyway, she's originally from Sri Lanka, but was married to an English man living in England with their two kids, two sons. And they were vacationing in Sri Lanka. It was over the Christmas holiday when that tsunami happened. So she and her husband, her two sons, her mother and her father were all staying in a hotel near the sea when the tsunami came. And they tried to escape, but the wave was just too much. So they all just got swept away, separated. And she's the only one who survived. She saw a tree branch, grabbed onto that, held onto that, and was rescued. But she lost her mother, her father, her husband, her two sons, and I think another relative as well, all at one go. And yeah, so she, you can imagine, was just devastated and had to go through a long process of healing from that. And she, the story I heard was she tried going to a few different therapists, but didn't really find much help, and finally found Mark Tatz, who's the author of that book, in Thoughts Without a Thinker. I think that's his name, Mark Tatz. Huh? Mark Epstein, sorry. Okay, Mark Epstein? Mark Epstein. Yeah, he's the author of that book. And she even moved to New York in order to be with him. And he advised her to write her experiences. And she would spend hours every day just writing about her life, her family, the wave, everything. Wrote it all down. And apparently it was really, really helpful for her to not totally heal, but come to a better place. And then together they decided that it would be a book. So they made a book out of it. It's quite powerful if you would like to read it. Just called Wave. But yeah, it's really a kind of gut-wrenching experience that she went through. But yeah, that was something that really helped her, was to journal, to write everything down. I don't know the, brain science behind that, but I think many people find it helpful to write their experiences, journal. I guess it's not so common in Buddhism. Mostly you meditate. You do your journaling internally. But yeah, maybe many people also didn't know how to write, didn't have materials with which to write, but now we have a lot of that. And you say it's better to do it with your hand rather than computer, longhand. Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I think I did see Venerable Pema's hand first.
In your teaching with the Buddha's quotation, I'm wondering, have you read anywhere in the sutras where the Buddha talked about his experience as a child growing up losing the mother? Like he would probably, as a child, know that his mother died and potentially linked to his birth. Sounds like, they don't talk about it, but like postpartum, kind of like something related to that he's coming to this life, to this world, and that his mother passed. That have you seen anywhere that in the sutra that it talks about?
I haven't, but I haven't read everything there is. There's a huge number of sutras, so it could be there.
I think I cannot remember the name of the sutra, but that sutra this mention about her, the mother of Prince Siddhartha passed away because he did choose the family and the continent where he would be born, and I think in a Vaipulya sutra, but I cannot know the English name. Because his mother Maya is not like an ordinary woman, but her vow to become the mother of a Buddha. So not the priest like an ordinary person.
Yeah, I think that's mentioned in that book, the biography of the Buddha that I was giving BBCs about. Yeah, a few years ago there was a book published that tells the story of Buddha's, well, both mothers, Maya and also Gautami, who were sisters. And yeah, the writer of the book did a lot of research. She spent something like 10 years doing research. And there was something about previous lives. They had in their previous lives, they made this kind of vow to be the mother of the Buddha. And so how did the Buddha, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that. He was 7 days old when she died. But, in our tradition, they say when the Buddha was already a Buddha, he was already enlightened at that time. And so he would have known, he knew what was going on. But maybe because of these previous connections that they had in previous lives, and she made this promise, this vow that she would, be the mother of Buddha, then, he wasn't upset. Anyway, and he was a Buddha, so he was beyond being upset or getting depressed or feeling guilty or anything like that. So that's how it would be understood, I think, in our tradition, in the Mahayana tradition. But in the Theravada tradition, the Pali tradition, I don't know. I couldn't speak for that.
That would not be consistent with what they talk about the three messengers. Like, then he wouldn't be shocked seeing the dead person, the ill person.
The Buddha was already enlightened, but when he came to this world and did all the things he did, it was to teach us. So he was just showing the aspect of doing these things, to teach us, to show us.
Yeah, I understand that. But then if you show aspects of that, then it's not consistent if he's not showing aspect of, somebody saying, my mother has passed away because of birth of me. And so it's like, if he's showing aspect of seeing those messengers and then renouncing, then not as a child experiencing whatever, of learning that my birth mother passed away because of giving birth to me.
Well, it's possible that he did show the aspect of doing that. I just haven't. apparently there's not a lot of information about the Buddha's life, until the time he attained enlightenment. And he himself spoke only very briefly about, details of his life. That's the understanding I have. So, yeah, there's just not much information of his life growing up and things he did and things he said and so on. So it's possible that he did have some feelings or show the aspect of having feelings because his mother passed away, but I don't know.
I just want to quickly say thank you so much for all the detail and thought and research you gave earlier about that view of self today. That was really helpful. And I had a quick question about journaling. How to do that therapeutically without letting it turn into self-strengthening storytelling? Because I know making a story out of an event that you have difficulty with is something that's, I know, very discouraged by a lot of Buddhist teachers I've met, but I also know many people, including myself, have gotten some benefit out of journaling. So do you know how to sort of walk that line?
Not really. I mean, like I say, it's not really something that's part of our tradition, something that our teachers teach us, or something that they do themselves, as far as I know. I've used it myself at certain times when I was working through some kind of difficulty. I did find it helpful to be able to write things down. But then, yeah, I guess you need to not be attached to these words that you've written down, and they were relevant at a certain point in time, but not necessarily at a later point in time. So to be able to do that and then let them go, although you might want to hang on to them and read them again later to remember, what those insights that you had, because that's very helpful too. Sometimes if you have insights during your meditations, to write them down so they're not forgotten, and you can read them again later and reignite those insights. So yeah, I'm not really sure if there's specific ways to do that without increasing your sense of self. Yeah. Microphone.
Yeah, I read a Buddhist psychologist in Mandala magazine, I think, who talked about this in terms of we all have a story that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and that if we can identify what that story is, that story, like that through line in our journaling, then that can help us in our practice. And an example, personally, for me, it was really clear that the story that I was telling myself about myself was that the world is unfair, and it's particularly unfair to me. And once I recognized that that was the story, I asked myself, is that true? Like from a Buddhist perspective? Wait, that doesn't make sense from a karmic standpoint. So I can't remember the name of that psychologist, but there were a number of those types. So I think journaling can help us reveal those stories that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, and give us opportunity to analyze them objectively from a Dharma perspective.
Last question from me. So, out of curiosity, I'm ignorant on the topic of curiosity for all of you monastics. Do you write down your insights in meditation and look back at them and see your progression? Or how do you track that? Or is that something you hold in your memory because you've meditated on it for so long?
I do write down my insights, especially during our winter retreat. I write them down in a journal, and then at the end of winter retreat, I kind of compile them, and then throughout the year, I go back and look at them, and they kind of, because they're so much deeper during that winter retreat period, reviewing them helps me to kind of go back into that memory and that mindset, and it does help kind of refresh it and keep it more alive, and I can keep kind of working on it throughout the year rather than just having an insight and then forgetting about it. So.
Anyone else do journaling?
Yeah, journaling is something that I usually do on the computer, but I do see that there's benefit doing it like with my hand. What I have done with journaling is sometimes I write dialogues, have dialogues with myself, because that really clarifies all these floaty thoughts in my head. And when I can write them down on paper, I can really like grasp what's going on. And I had a lot of confusion for, a few years about, should I get ordained? Should I not get ordained? And I finally just sat down like a few years later and wrote a dialogue with myself to gain some clarity. And it was through that dialogue that I discovered the answer. So I still have that written down dialogue that I can go back to. It's very powerful, journaling.
Thank you.